Please do not throw coin. Well, because you're supposed to flick it in. That's twice already I've tried to flick it in and it hasn't gone in. Okay. Oh, good. So we needed a band to play with us, and a friend of mine at the time had a band. And so we thought it'd be an awesome idea that we would do the show together at this little tiny cafe on Nelson Street. This tiny little place. It sat about maybe 40 people. The thing is that my friend's band was a little on the industrial side. So once they started playing, I think it was like into their second song, the manager jumps over the bar, runs over to the soundboard, and actually pulls the plug, unplugs it. And needless to say, everybody freaked out. I think their drummer jumped down onto the dance floor, and there's this huge standoff, chairs almost being thrown, screaming, name-calling. That was our first show.
And in a few short years, we'd played every venue in town. It didn't matter if it was a posh hotel lobby or a lounge where the drum kit was falling apart. We would throw down in rock clubs just for the hell of it. In fact, we went into clubs that no other bands wanted to go into. We didn't believe in cliques or genres or any of that crap. We didn't go down for nobody. We were like the Charles Bukowskis of the local scene.
Hey, to all my friends! To all my friends! We were down in the same well when the rain fell on the street. So hard, so hard, so
And then suddenly something weird started happening. The real estate boom washed over the city, and suddenly real estate prices just skyrocketed. It stopped being about booking bands. It started being about paying the almighty lease. And so one by one we saw iconic venues either close down or change their format altogether and start hosting dance parties or karaoke or whatever.
The person booking the room, rather than having a vision of what entertainment is and how they're going to use entertainment to benefit they'll put some junior person as it's like a sort of an afterthought. It's like, we'll get this person to book bands, right? So there isn't the type of vision that there used to be in clubs that were successful as music clubs. I think we've kind of lost a lot of that.
It's already a weird dynamic because you've got a club who draws people who like alcohol and musicians who would like to think they draw people who like music. And it's not always that the music and the alcohol line up. They do a lot of times, but they don't always line up. The cost of housing and the cost of commercial space, it's really high in Vancouver. So I don't know what the number is per square foot, but it's high in Vancouver.
Yeah.
So you have to generate a lot of revenue to pay just your rent to be here.
Vancouver real estate typical prices are 11 times the median income. It's the most expensive city in North America, if you ask me. And if you look at a ratio of prices to income, we are now either the second most expensive or the most expensive city in the world.
So we're here outside of the Cobalt in Vancouver. This used to be one of the most illustrious live music venues in town. It's now closed though. And what we're seeing is that these venue closures are not just isolated incidents. In some cases, they seem to be affecting entire neighborhoods. Like if you look across the street, that building there used to actually be the Electric Owl, which was also an illustrious music venue.
Yeah, and this is the Fairview. Rezoning application right there. That place was called Cafe Momart, and they had live music and spoken word and poetry slams. It was like wandering into a Henry Miller novel. But he closed down too. Right here used to be a club called Riches on Richards, which, I mean, this was a huge club here. The Lemonheads played there. I mean, you name it. There were so many bands that played there. And in fact, it got turned into condos. And this used to be the location of the legendary Media Club. On any given Friday night, there would have been so many people just standing outside the Lieber Room, but as you can see, it's darkened.
Well, I think it hit home for us personally when the Railway Club closed, because we used to play there once or twice a month, and we were planning on doing our CD release show there too. And about 3 weeks before the show, I got a phone call from a friend telling me that the Railway Club was closed. It had survived World War II. It had survived acid wash. It survived so many things, and then one day it just suddenly closed down. And it couldn't happen at a worse time, you know, right before a CD release show. So yeah, that one really hit us personally, definitely.
Prices are very high, way above what locals can afford. I think that's an established fact. There's no dispute on that. And once locals can't afford to live here, then they start moving away. And there is some evidence already in the census data that people are indeed moving away, and it's especially young people who tend to frequent places like the Railway Club. If your customers move away, it doesn't matter what happens to your lease, you still cannot really survive.
Well, the venue closure sucked for sure, but we actually looked at that as an opportunity to become 100% totally OCD about our recording process.
So right now, would you rather hear more piano?
No, it's good. It's good.
All right.
And the woods went by like rolling thunder.
That was shit.
Never ever made it home.
I guess these are
Never
good.
ever made it home.
Oh, that's a little different.
Made it home.
Or I don't know, maybe you're right. Maybe that other one is the best. Like that's perfectly on.
Never ever made it home.
It's like what?
It's like Morrissey.
Moz. Is that what you call it?
Made it home.
Never ever made
spending all your time recording, it gives you some kind of purpose, like you're doing something. But eventually, like many other artists, I had to leave Vancouver because there was just nowhere really to play anymore. So I went back to Los Angeles and I started approaching venues there, assuming that there was going to be nothing going on at all. And suddenly I was getting booked. Suddenly a Charlie Nobody like me was able to play these iconic venues. It almost didn't make sense. But I didn't go to Los Angeles just for the music. I mean, there's that, but there's also this whole other side to it. It's like, to me, the place really exists in Technicolor, almost like an old Hal Ashby film or something. I mean, they leave a lot of their buildings just standing there, for decades. There's neighborhoods there that haven't been touched pretty much since the 50s. It's almost like postcards from a dead generation, It's funny, I have this poet friend who explained LA perfectly once. He said, it's kind of like this desert oasis at the end of the earth where you can exist among images of dead artists and lemon trees. You look at some of the architecture and it venerates something. It's not just a bland, boxy structure. I mean, I really love that they're not tearing those buildings down and building these ugly glass condominiums. And if you don't have a sense of history, I don't see how you can have a sense of identity.
So we're here today at Eastwest Studios, one of the most legendary studios in the world. Elvis Presley's recorded here, Frank Sinatra's recorded here, the Beach Boys. We're going to be putting some finishing touches on the new album with my friend Rhys, who's been an engineer here for years. Hopefully we can fix the bass. There's been a bit of a problem with the bass, but I think today we're going to be able to fix it, hopefully. And we're going to chat with Rhys a little bit and get his take on a few things. So let's go in.
Like, do you feel that people are getting away from studio recordings?
No. Basically, there's it's just more of everything, okay? It's like there's a lot of studios that are closed because, the technology's made it so that people can make, broadcast quality recordings in their house, It's like they can use samples, they can have a good mic and a good vocal booth, and that's it. But then there's the people that want to play together, and that's when more of a traditional studio environment comes into play, and a more traditional sort of a capturing console like this one here, where it's just not going to sound the same like recording it at home, The guy that built this whole place is a huge pioneer, His name's Bill Putman, and he was the first person to actually record reverb on a record, It's like, he had that magic touch, He's like Tesla of the recording world, Well, there's about 20 studios in the world that are considered temples of sound, and there's a whole book about that, and this is one of those studios, so it's in there with the, and some of the ones in that book are gone now, so it's shrinking.
So what went on in here? Like what?
Dream section, like Hawaii Five-0, all those kind of TV shows. The Monkees, you know, the Partridge Family, all those kind of things.
They record the Partridge Family in here?
Yeah. Rick and Crew, and once more.
That's amazing.
Yep. Same with the Monkees, Rick and Crew. And
I love the Partridge Family.
yeah.
This is the amazing room where the Beach Boys recorded their Pet Sounds album, and as you can see, this is the same soundproofing. It's like the same wood. This has been in every photograph I've ever seen of the studio. So many amazing recordings have been done in here. It's really amazing, actually, to think that this, back in its heyday in Hollywood in the 60s, this was where it was all happening. See this? Look at this. Like these old scrapes here, like that scrape right there. Who knows? Somebody could have done that, you know. Maybe that was Brian Wilson was moving a chair and did that. That's all the original tiling and everything. It's beautiful. It was good seeing Rhys. You know, he was a funny guy, and he always had a way of passing on knowledge to you. You know, you would always pick something up. And that night we wound up fixing the bass, which I didn't think we'd be able to do, but somehow we did it. We decided to go to some clubs and see some bands and sort of take in the nightlife. I mean, they take their live music very seriously in LA. It always surprises me how many people want live music. You know, it kind of made me wonder how there could be so much music going on in one city. We got invited to a rock show downtown by Hollywood concert promoter T-Roy, who was also playing in one of the bands that night.
Live music is still a very, very large part of the fabric of Los Angeles. Obviously, movies is number one, but music is number two. When people come here, they want to go to the Whiskey, they want to go to the Roxy, they want to go to the Viper Room. Johnny Depp hasn't owned the Viper Room for years, but people still associate it with Johnny Depp. So I think it's bigger than music. It's about entertainment, and it's about almost like a lifestyle that is synonymous with what we do and part of our culture here. Now, I will say that perhaps the scene has begun to move geographically. In the last few years, maybe the last 15 years, you saw it move to Silver Lake with places like Silver Lake Lounge, Spaceland, the Echo. And now you've really seen it here in downtown Los Angeles, places like the Globe, seen places like Ham and Eggs, live music at Cranes on 8th and Spring, the Lexington, and a few other places, the Arts District with Residents. But the common denominator is that there's still live music.
Fucking million streams. Yeah! I'm playing for you right now. It's called Black and White.
Back and forth, back and forth. Don't know what you want, but you know you want me enough to grab my hand.
clubs will come and go. But as far as like the ones that no matter where you are in the world, you just watch Rockin' Me at the Troubadour, it's still there. And it's not hanging on by a thread. It's alive and kicking.
I wanted to know more about how these club owners were staying afloat. So we met up with Todd Christiansen, owner of The Mint, an iconic LA music venue.
So I bought this in 2004 with a small group that I put together. Pretty much every musician you can think of has played here at one time or another over the years. Been around since 1937. You do have to, as a business owner, you have to be resilient and responsive to situations that come up, because not everything stays the same. It's not all static. There's constantly things changing. They just passed a law, AB 5, that they don't want anybody being an independent contractor in the state of California. It means that you have to put them on your payroll. So if they're on payroll, then they have to have workers' comp. Okay, so quickly the cost of doing business add up and not in your favor. And there's only so much you can charge for a beer. I'm not going to charge $15 for a beer. So, there was many years I remember back maybe around the early 2000s where everybody just wanted to see a DJ. Like nobody wanted to see live music there for a while. Oh, we're going to see this artist. Who is he? Oh, he's DJ so-and-so. So he's playing records, right? Okay, but they view it as an artist, which is fine. They're artists in their own right. But
do you find it challenging to host primarily live music nights? Is that a challenge?
Oh, yeah. It's a challenge because I got a talent buyer who's got to buy 3-4 bands a night. You have a production guy who handles all the load-in times, makes sure the PA system's up to snuff. Stage lights got to be good. You got to maintain that. Then you need a marketing guy. Why? Because all the social media things that you have to do these days, and you got to be marketing and promoting. And we're doing, 100 plus shows a month, I think. When you can count like 3 or 4 bands a night. And we have a kitchen and a full bar. So it's a lot of moving parts for a smaller club. For me, it's a labor of love. I do other things to supplement my income on a nightly basis. We want people to know that when they walk in here, they may not know the band or the artist, but they know that they're gonna come in here and hear some good music. That's the main thing.
So what we learned here in Los Angeles is that in spite of an ever-inflating real estate market, live music venues are not closing down. In fact, they are supporting their local indie bands as much as they ever have. It's a bit of an enigma.
We wanted to find out how radio figured into the whole equation. So we met with Barry Levine, who's been hosting his own show, The Bears Den, down at KISW for the last 23 years.
Now, I started The Bears Den over there as how did I call it? Oh yes, a show about the fringe. Punk, alternative, grunge, hardcore, emo, ska, lots of old bands you love, lots of new bands we hope you haven't heard of before. And it was to support underground bands. Now, over all these years, of course, some of those underground bands have gotten very big. I still play them, though. Basically, we don't really have a rule over what gets played on my show, as long as somebody likes it. And, of course, I play a lot of new releases. This guy walked into the station, and he said, I'm looking for someone I can give a CD to. And I said, well, you can give it to me. I'll give it to the music people. And I said, who are they? And he said, well, there's this band we're trying to get signed called Smash Mouth. And I asked, okay, what kind of stuff do they play? He said, kind of like pop punk. And I just sort of said, mister, you came to the right show. And he handed me the CD, and I started playing them that day. And I have it on good authority that I was the first DJ in all of Los Angeles to ever give Smash Mouth airtime. Now, did that help them get big? Probably not, because they're from San Jose, and I know that there were DJs up there who were playing them all the time. And that's what really got their attention. If all the stations are going to be owned by one company, they can dictate what people listen to, and that's why you need indie stations and college stations. You know, they've said that college radio has influenced what people listen to starting in the 80s. I don't know if that's as true now as it was then, but a lot of bands that got big in the 80s and 90s would not have been found without college radio. I mean, the first artist that really comes to mind is R.E.M. And look how big they got. But where would they have been if college radio hadn't been around in the 80s? It's not just that Los Angeles is big, it's also very spread out. You know, you have Orange County, you have Long Beach, you have Los Angeles itself, Anaheim, all the other areas. And like, for instance, during the first wave of punk in the late 70s and early 80s, a lot of the bands all came from different neighborhoods. Contrast that with New York City, which admittedly has about 3 times as many people living there as Los Angeles does, but it's much more compacted. And so all the punk bands there, they all knew each other in a way they might not have in LA because they were in a much smaller area and they all wound up playing on the same shows. I mean, that's one of the reasons why CBGB's became such a well-known place. CBGB's closed 13 years ago. And the CBGB story is much more personal. They got into a fight with the landlord.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the landlord claimed they owned a lot of back rent that they didn't owe because it had all been paid off. But that's a whole big story in and of itself.
Wow. So they're losing venues in New York as well?
They have been. Scenes tend to be in the outer boroughs more than in Manhattan these days. I don't get back there as much as I would like, but I do know that a lot of the clubs I used to go to in the late 90s and early 2000s are gone. And CBGB's is gone, Coney Island High is gone, the Wetlands is gone. ABC No Rio is still there, might be the only one that is. You know, these are all Manhattan clubs and they're all gone.
CBGB's, legendary live music venue, closes down because of a rent dispute. You know, it kind of made me wonder how protected historical sites really are. So we decided to visit a historical site in East Hollywood just to see how well that was maintained. It's called Hollyhock House. It's up on the top of Olive Hill. It was actually designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and he designed it for Aileen Barnsdall, who's, you know, this eccentric oil heiress. And anyway, she wanted the house built here. As the story goes, after suffering a devastating personal tragedy, Frank Lloyd Wright packed up and moved to Los Angeles. And it was in the aftermath of that mess that he designed this amazing building along with a bunch of other ones, but this was the one that he designed for Aileen Barnsdall, who actually wound up donating this entire property to the city of Los Angeles. And she did that hoping that artists would come here and be inspired and that people could do their art here. That's why it's so quiet. That's why everybody's sitting around reading and doing poetry and painting. It's a really creative place. But what about historical sites that have fallen into disrepair? Is it solely up to the boards and the councils and the foundations? Or is there something more that needs to be done? Some responsibility that lies with the people? Okay, so over my shoulder here is the Westlake Theater. At one point in time, it was one of the most illustrious theaters in Los Angeles, and now it's a swap meet. Well, I think the last thing it was used for was a swap meet. I don't even know what's going on in there now, if anything. It's a perfect example of what can happen when a historical site is just left and nothing's done with it. You know, how far can it go past the point of no return until it's too late and they just, you know, they can't do anything with it. It'd be a real shame too, because if you look at the architecture of this building, it's really amazing, and I think it really venerates the era that it came from, and you can almost imagine what it would be like back in the old days, people pulling up in their old style cars and, you know, walking up and standing outside in line at the box office there. I've seen pictures of the inside and it's very beautiful, but for now it's closed, and I guess it'll remain closed until someone decides to do something with it. If it were up to me, I think I would turn this into a music venue. You know, it could easily be what the Fillmore Auditorium was to San Francisco. Well, after seeing what was going on down in LA, I figured I needed to go back up to Vancouver and ask some more questions because it just didn't make sense to me. How could a city the size of Vancouver lose so many of its venues and not quite recover from that? So I figured I was going to get into some like Ted Koppel type shit and just really throw a net out there. And I emailed boards and foundations and councils and even venues. And, you know, I only got a few replies. And those replies sort of pointed towards people not really wanting to talk about it. You know, so I figured what I would do is go talk to some of the people that have been slugging it out in the trenches amidst all of these venue closures. We sat down with Corinne Leigh, who runs the Rio, a theater which narrowly escaped becoming another condominium development.
As an independent theater, you have to be very creative. So we do a lot of live shows, movies, we do burlesque, comedy, and a lot of independent films, cult classics. In 2012, when we applied to get a liquor license, the government told us that movie theaters weren't allowed to have a liquor license, and that was because of some outdated law from the 1920s. So then we had to rally the community to try and get the liquor law changed in order for us to be able to serve alcohol with our movies. We were successful, and we managed to change the liquor laws for the entire province. And so movie theaters all over are now able to serve alcohol.
How hard was it to actually change the liquor law?
It took us 4 months of campaigning regularly. We had to harass the powers that be. Rich Coleman was the minister at the time, and finance minister, and we had to just be relentless. And then in 2018, zoning changes made the property go up for sale. And then a developer wanted to buy it and tear the building down to build condos. So we could either give up and let them tear down the Rio, or we had to raise the $8 million to buy it. So that's what we did. We rallied the community once again, and the Rio fans are amazing, and everybody chipped in, and we were able to buy the property. We had some famous folks like Ryan Reynolds donated to the campaign and was sharing about the event. We also had Kevin Smith donated 2 sold-out shows to help save the Rio. So it was pretty amazing, the support we got. So now the Rio is 100% community-owned, which is really amazing. As far as I know, it's the only one of its kind. I haven't met anybody else who's done this.
So there is obviously a bit of an issue with closing down venues for arts and culture in Vancouver?
Yeah, absolutely. We've lost 90% of the theaters in Vancouver. So we like theaters, when we were trying to get the liquor laws changed, theaters were dropping like flies. They were all closing their doors. We would have been one of those casualties if we didn't change the liquor laws.
If Corinne wasn't such a fighter and we lost this, I'd be gone. Like, it's the last stand. It's all there is. There was a lot of cool venues in the downtown east side back in the day. This great one called the Church of Pointless Hysteria. And the city kept shutting it down, going, oh, you don't have enough stairs, or you know this. And then they would do the renovations, and they kept, and it's like, let it go. This is a great thing happening here. No one's getting rich, you know? There's a lot of secret venues popping up in people's homes all over the city. And it's kind of going back to the old days where it's like, you want a listening room where you can hear a pin drop? It's going to be crammed in someone's house.
Do you think clubs are sort of have an identity crisis because they don't really know if they're a pub, a sports bar, a restaurant, or a live music venue? They want to be...
I think that's a very fair statement. I think a lot of clubs struggle with that because they're trying to blend them, and it's all about getting an audience, right? So being a sports bar with lots of TVs gets you people to watch sports and like to watch TVs, right? And that's a demographic. And then, so that what they're trying to do is they mix the sports bar with the live music, with the band, cover band, and they're hoping that they can appeal to all demographics and keep people in the bar.
Yeah.
It's, and yeah, I don't know that, I don't think that's ideal for branding.
You know, I think that's kind of destroyed the ambience too. I mean, if you're playing somewhere live music and you've got 16 screens with 20 different games going on at the same time, I mean, how can anybody concentrate? I'd be sitting on stage and I'm like watching the game myself in the middle of a song.
Pretty much everyone we spoke to told us that inflated real estate prices were the reason so many arts and culture venues have closed in Vancouver. To learn more about this, we sat down with Keith Roy, a prominent Vancouver realtor.
The reason we would lose arts and culture venues in the city: 1, it's expensive to live here and people don't have disposable income. 2, the land on which those venues sit is more valuable as housing, like far more valuable as housing, economically speaking, than they are as small venues. 3, the cultural mix of the city isn't one that is supportive of creative arts and culture, generally speaking. And 4, we just don't have a long history of it here. It's not the kind of city we are. We're a city of flashy cars and trips to Whistler Mountain and big luxury condos. It's just who we are now. And good or bad, it's the reality. It's not just real estate in that real estate's expensive and therefore we're going to take over this low revenue producing product and turn it into condos or townhouses or whatever density. It's that people can't afford to go out because rent's too high, because mortgages are too high. And so you have a city where everyone has a full-time job and a side gig. You know, everyone's got a side hustle. People don't go out and spend money after work. They're broke because it's just so expensive. So Vancouver's never been affordable. I can show you pictures from the early 1900s of people lining up to buy real estate. There's always been a lineup to buy real estate here at every decade in history, except maybe the 80s. Like the early 80s was a tough time for the Canadian economy. But people have always lined up to buy real estate here. It's never been an affordable city. That's not a term that will ever apply to a city that looks like Vancouver. Places like Winnipeg are affordable. Atlanta is affordable. California, not affordable. Vancouver, not affordable. Seattle, not affordable. These are great cities on the West Coast with good climates, high qualities of life, stable governments, clean cities, like things that you want. And if you have money and you can afford it, you're going to go to those places.
When you look at Seattle, we were there, and it seems to also be in the same climate, the general area. They also have the mountains. They also have inflating real estate prices, but yet, for some reason, they've managed to maintain a lot of their venues.
There's a bit of that. I mean, look, Seattle has always had that history of arts and culture, right? That grunge culture. Rock bands come out of Seattle. This is a place where, Vancouver's a place where Bon Jovi recorded an album. Rich, famous artists come here to put headphones on in a studio. There's not that, we don't create that arts and culture type of person. I think some of it's a function of the immigration into the city. The different cultures that are predominant in Vancouver, and we don't have a majority in Vancouver anymore. Everyone's a minority. It's a plurality city. But you've got primarily Chinese, other Asian countries, Koreans, Japanese, Hong Kong. You've got Indo-Canadians, and you've got Filipinos. Those are kind of your three dominant cultures. When I think of arts and culture in the North American sense, I tend not to think of those three groups. They all have their own very strong culture, and their cultures are very prominent. And you can find them all throughout the city. You drive around, you'll see we have a Little India, we have a very prominent Chinatown, we have parts of town where Filipino food is, abundant. We don't have that Seattle grunge rock culture. We've never really had that. And so what little we had has kind of just faded away as cultural groups have separated into their own little segments. And the average person who goes out and supports those venues and listens to live music and, has a couple beers and pays a cover charge, that guy can't afford to go out anymore. His rent's too high. And Vancouver's not a city that produces anything. You don't see any manufacturing stacks. You don't see anything going on here. We make great scenery and good memories. I think the largest employer in the city of Vancouver is the Vancouver Canucks. That's not that's nothing of value. That's entertainment. You know what? There you go. That's Canadian arts and culture. The Vancouver Canucks.
So there are a number of reasons. So one is obviously foreign investment. It's no secret that foreigners buy our real estate, and in fact I have a paper with Sir Somerville at UBC that identifies the effect of foreign capital inflows into Vancouver. And we do find a significant impact. It's interest rates. So Bank of Canada keeps interest rates at incredibly low levels. That may be for a good reason, but as a side effect, we get incredibly high prices here. In addition to that, our local zoning and infrastructure is, in my view, in trouble. In most cities, you can cover 30 to 40 kilometers in about 40 minutes. In Vancouver, you barely get to Boundary Road in 40 minutes. Right? So if you look for live music in Vancouver, how many new clubs are there really to replace what has been closed? So, and by the way, you can say, well, maybe that's social media, maybe we just have better TV at home and we don't want to leave the house and that kind of stuff. Well, that's true, but I don't think there's a trend like that in Seattle or in New York or in San Francisco.
I had a few shows booked in Seattle, so I figured it'd be a good opportunity to talk to some people there about how they've managed to maintain their music scene.
I wish I knew, because I think you could take that and transplant it to other cities. The best answer I could give you would be community. It really is a community here.
What's happening now, I think, is really exciting in the fact that there are a lot of bands who are really supportive of one another in our community. Seattle's music venues are incredible as far as the balance of what they bring to the music lovers in this area. It's primarily live music and it's primarily original music. It's a great mix of local, national, international. I think there's a lot of opportunities for local bands to open and support nationally touring bands. That's something that venues are really, good about, making sure that happens.
We have this sign up here to display that we look for just original music. This is a really good banner because it shows our fundraising on the hair air. Back in January, we ran a month-and-a-half long fundraiser where we reached more than $25,000 worth of funds in order to go extraterrestrial, and that's the amount that we needed in order to install our antenna and actually have the rights to a call station, and that was solely by community support. Everything we raised.
This book, actually, Sub Pop USA. It's like Bruce Pavitt, who's the guy who founded Sub Pop. He was just sick of all of the sort of garbage new wave bands that like major labels were pushing, and the zine was supposed to break down what he called the pop suprastructure, and like he said the way to do that was by really focusing on and championing local bands. Because only by doing that will you get sort of like non-homogenized, art and like new cultural heroes is what he called it. It's just sort of become a part of what it means to be from Seattle. It's like there's a lot of local bands, and like there's a culture of people going out and supporting those bands.
The bands here have always been here doing the same thing. In the 90s, someone caught onto it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Labels, but like nothing's changed. Like
nothing's changed. I mean, there's less. There's certainly less record labels here. There aren't record people banging down band practice room doors, but the same stuff's going on. There's still brilliant bands here. There's still a lot of places to play in Seattle. Everybody still plays in everybody else's band. Everybody's still looking out for each other. There's still that sense of community. But in the 90s, I mean, walk down the street carrying a guitar case and somebody would walk up to you with a contract, from what I understand, come be on my label. You're a Seattle musician? That's great. We love Seattle musicians. I mean, imagine on any given Thursday night you could go out and see Alice in Chains play with Soundgarden, and that was just a regular Thursday night in Seattle. You could walk down the street from here. There was a club called the Off Ramp that's called El Corazon now, where they still have live music 6-7 days a week. Pretty cool. But you can still do that. I mean, it's not Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, but they're bands of that caliber that just happen to not be signed to major record labels. I mean, you can see bands play every night of the week in this town if you want to, and they're out there. Go see them.
We have a front window space that's dedicated to one show a month that's a local bill. Like usually it's a release party or something, or just a big show for them. And we give them the opportunity to decorate it and be promoting their show for an entire month. We do have a reputation as far as the level of entertainment that somebody can expect to have here. They know that it's high caliber artists presenting an amazing show. So that's why we do all of this. This is not a moneymaker. It's not a thing that we're all sitting back, counting our money, watching this all happen. Everything is bare bones as far as like covering all of our expenses and staffing and things like that, so that we can offer this to people.
We're about exhibiting, the raw and the grunge and the underbelly of what I think deservingly is one of the meccas for music in this country. Also, we are against swearing, so we've got the swear jar here.
Why do you think Seattle has been able to maintain its thriving music scene? I mean, is it because it's always been a musical hub since way back when, or?
I think it's the people who live here. What you find is a bedrock of artists, whether they be fine artists or musicians, and whether the prices of living are increasing, people aren't just going to leave. They'll find a way to scrap and survive. And
people are very they expect it, and they will fight for it.
It's part of the culture around here to go see bands, even if you've never heard of them. I mean, that's part of the joy of it, right? Sometimes they're not great. Sometimes they're the most amazing thing you've ever seen. And dude, you have to check out this band that I saw last night.
And so in the end, I think arts and culture isn't something that's always just going to be there. We gotta protect it. We gotta preserve it. And it's not just up to the boards and the councils and the foundations. It's up to us, the general public brigade.